Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're joining us today. And I have another guest with me today that I'm so excited for you to meet. She is a former educator in many different roles, which I'm going to let her tell you about. But the topic today is a little bit sensitive only because it's everyone's, I think, worst nightmare. It's definitely every educator's worst nightmare. It's probably every student and parent's worst nightmare as well. And I'm just going to let her start telling her story about what happened and how that has changed her role in life and what she's doing now. And so, Brandy Samuel, thank you for being on my podcast today.
Oh gosh, Cynthia, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate talking about anything school counseling or
Mhm.
anything school related. And even though I'm not directly into school now, I still say I'm an educator. And like you, I'm a former school counselor. I love school counseling.
Mhm.
And my trajectory just changed, right? So
Yeah.
just a little bit about me. I graduated with a business degree, a bachelor's in business, and I worked for a high-end department store in Dallas and
Mm.
loved what I did, but I just one day thought, oh, this isn't the real world. And was a little rogue when I was young. So I decided I would start substitute teaching, which I did, and I went back to school, picked up an entire deficiency plan in elementary education and thought I would be in the classroom my entire career. And I'm not sure what shifted. You know how we just have those life changes sometimes.
Mhm.
So got my master's in school counseling, and I was a school counselor for many years. I'm still a licensed school counselor in 4 states, and I'll never give those up because
Mhm.
that's something I love, and I never want to lose touch with that. Um, I spent a lot of time in the special education world too, and was a special education director for several years and an assistant superintendent. And that role really changed my life path professionally, if you will. I had many different roles in my assistant superintendent role. I was in Roswell, New Mexico, and I've been an educator in Texas, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. And I love New Mexico's my love. Like I loved my time there. I met the most impactful people in my whole educational career. And then I moved into the virtual world way prior to COVID. So I had a great understanding of what virtual education looked like prior to COVID. And I'm so glad that I did.
Mhm.
And I know the impact that it can have. And my gosh, for any of you educators out there, it offers so much efficiency. I used virtual speech language services when I was an assistant superintendent. I'm
Mm.
in Roswell because I had general ed in the wheelhouse of student support. And then I had special education and we couldn't find any providers. So I was glad I got to be in that world. And then 2 years ago, I came to Illuma. And I like to say this is a culmination of everything. I should be retired. This is my 33rd year in some form of education, 31 years directly school facing. And I should be retired, but like, what am I going to do? I get bored easy. As you
Mhm.
can tell from that little brief bio about myself, I always tell everybody I'm not special. I just get bored easy and I want to learn new things. And so that's how I really landed where I am today. And
Well, I
so,
love that, and I love that school counseling is my love too, and it always will be, and I just renewed my certificate to go or my license to go 6 more years, so even though I probably wouldn't go back into a school full-time to do the work, I wanna be helping counselors all over everywhere to do this job because it's so important, and it was such a love of mine, so
same.
Brandy, will you tell us a little bit about the time in 2014 when you first took that job in Roswell, New Mexico? What went on at that time?
Yes. So Roswell, New Mexico. I moved to Roswell in December of 13. I was recruited to go to Roswell as assistant superintendent. And as I mentioned, my title was assistant superintendent of special services. So really anything to do with students outside of curriculum came under student services.
Mhm.
So school counselors, school social workers, special education, oh my gosh, school nurses. So really
Mhm.
anything outside of curriculum. And so I started on January 7th, 2014. I'd met my boss, the superintendent of schools, Tom Burris, one time.
Mhm.
prior to January 14th. And if anybody that knows me, I'm late everywhere. Now, I might be the last one to leave and I might work until midnight and be like, oh my gosh, I better get home and take care of the dogs and let the horses, out or whatever. But I'm always late or I'm always right on time. And so I was so excited. It was, we had been off the day prior. I believe it was Martin Luther King Day.
Mm.
And we did recognize that as a holiday. Actually, that's not true. We had been out at some schools because we had ice. Schools froze. So anyway, we were out on that Monday for that. So on Tuesday, I was so happy I was early. I got to stop at Starbucks for my first time since I'd gone to work there. And the drive-through was too long. And I was inside ordering my drink. I was like the next one in line, and my phone rang. And I could tell it was a school district number. And remember, I only knew like three people.
Mm.
My secretary, my bookkeeper, and the director of school nurses. That was it. The week prior, I'd been going into schools, like I had my 90-day plan, and I'd been going to meet people. And anyway, so I knew it was a school number. And so I answered, and it was a colleague who was the other assistant superintendent at that time. And she said, Brandy, I just need to let you know that Mr. Burris asked me to call you, our superintendent, and ask you to activate the crisis team.
Mm.
And I said, okay, let me know a little bit about what's going on. And she said, well, we have a reported school shooting at Berendo Middle School, but it's not confirmed yet. So if you won't say anything to anybody, if you could just activate the crisis team, etc. So I hang up the phone and I just got out of line at Starbucks, and we didn't have a crisis team. It was on my list. I knew that it was going to be my responsibility. And that was one of the things I was going to work on right away, because there was not a process. There wasn't even a handbook, and there wasn't a team.
Mm.
And so I'm a very faithful person. So I thought, God, you gotta give me what I need here.
Mhm.
And the saving grace for me is I'd been trained in a process called CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management, many years prior. I kept that certification up. There's 3 levels of CISM, and I'm up to a level 2 at that time. I'm
Mhm.
level 3 now. And to this day, I can go in my garage and I can pull out my crisis box and it's all organized. And that was the only saving grace, is that I knew a process and I had all the materials at hand for any kind of crisis you could imagine, from an oil spill to a school shooting.
Mm.
And while I'd been trained many years prior, and I don't consider myself a naive person, I do think, like many people, I can fall into that trap. I thought this will never happen. I've led many responses to death by suicide, death of staff members, death of students through accident or illness, but I'd never led a response to a school shooting, and I didn't think I ever would have to.
Mm.
And so I get to my office quickly, and I went to my secretary, and she's a highly trusted individual. And I just said, I have to tell you what's going on. We really can't reveal this, but Angela, I need every certified counselor in the district, every certified social worker, and every nurse, regardless if they're working in that capacity.
Mm.
And really, our director of nurses, Erin, was a great support at this time too. I got everybody to assemble in a conference room that we have. And they didn't know why they were coming, but Roswell's a small town, so everything was hitting the news.
Mhm.
And anyway, everybody came together. By the time everybody got there, it was confirmed that there had been a school shooting. And I know this sounds very flippant, and I don't mean it that way. I just ask everybody, I said, I know none of you in here know me. Please trust me, but trust this process, because I know that it works.
Mhm.
And I know that it works because I've led other responses, and I just tried to build my credibility with them as quickly as I could. And I tried to be as relatable as I could, because I personally believe that relatability is everything to get
Mhm.
someone to trust me or to follow me. And I always use this word. I taught the Reader's Digest version as CISM, and I tried to do it the best justice that I could. And I started putting people into groups and pairs of how I wanted to respond. And I just said, hey, I don't know anybody. So if you don't like working with the person I put you with, will you guys just do it this time? And then we'll sort all that out.
Mhm.
So I trained in the quickest way that I knew. And so we faced several challenges before we went to the school, as this happened during drop off before school.
Mm.
So The district did have somewhat of an emergency plan if a building needed to be evacuated and how students would be transported, where they would go, and how the pickup would work. That was in place, thank goodness. But the issue we faced is we didn't know which kids had been dropped off and which
Mm,
hadn't.
right.
And there were some parents who pulled up with their children that knew something was going on that just drove through the driveway. And they
Mm-hmm.
might call in, but we, as guided and as the school leaders there at Berindo were guided, we weren't taking phone calls
Mm-hmm.
unless it was on a dedicated line, because then we knew it was law enforcement or something. So we had to keep everything as secure as we could. So that created, as you guys can imagine,
Oh my.
very scary for parents and
Mm-hmm.
students who were getting there and they're like, we don't know what's going on. And I would have been one of these students. Like, I lived so much in my own world, as a lot of us do in middle school, right? I love middle school. That's my place. That's where I was a
Mm-hmm.
counselor. And like, we kind of are finding ourselves, and I love that uniqueness. I don't know that I, as a student, would have known what was going on, except everybody was kind of running around and it was a little bit chaotic. And this wasn't a school with those quote unquote kind of problems. This is the most affluent school in the district. The all schools face crisis or behavioral challenges or this and that, but often our more affluent schools don't face the same challenges as such as some of our poorer
Mm-hmm.
schools with poorer populations. So at any rate, we had students in the gym, we had students in hallways, we had students in a safety hold, if you will, in classrooms, like a lockdown situation, which that was in place, all of those around safe school requirements, but the crisis team practice process wasn't in place. So by
Mm-hmm.
the time I was getting word back and forth from my colleague, another assistant superintendent, the one that called me, Susan, she said, can you guys go ahead and come to the school? By the time we got to the school that they allowed us to come in, all students had been cleared.
Mm-hmm.
And and what we were really working on, and we dedicated people from the crisis team to help locate students. Um, Fortunately, I believe for us is this school was very rural, very much out in the country. So we didn't have bike riders and we didn't have walkers,
Mm-hmm.
which really was a blessing in this situation, is they either rode the bus or they were dropped off by parents. So our biggest chaos at that point was really just trying to get students with parents. But
Mm-hmm.
the crisis team went into a different mode, and we pulled in all staff and we started working with the staff. Because as everybody knows, if the staff's not okay, and if you're a student listening, you guys know when your teachers aren't doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell you're around people a lot. This was mid-year. So we really just started working with the staff and trying to debrief and normalize. And I'm not sure at that point if you really can normalize, but that's really what we were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness Roswell's a small enough town that there was familiarity around the room. People recognized each other. We were really able to pair people off. We were able to pull people individually. So we really focused on staff. Like, if that was just sitting while somebody cried and just talked about repetitively what they saw, we just wanted to get that out. And that's part of
Mm-hmm.
critical incidents stress management, is you need to debrief as a group, small group, and then individually. So we really spent the whole day doing that. as
Mm-hmm.
we as we got into the phase of when can students come back, and we didn't know, and we were also receiving information on our students who had been directly impacted. We had Nathaniel, and the young lady's name was Kendall. I'm still in contact with Nathaniel, and if any of you guys are interested, I can share with you, Cynthia. Nathaniel's written a book. He does
Mm-hmm.
public speaking engagements. I stay in contact with him. He is just an incredible young man. He's
Mm-hmm.
graduated from college. I mean, he's an entrepreneur, and he's truly inspirational on so many levels, even if he wouldn't have been through this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So Nathaniel had the most significant injuries. So we were preparing for 2 ways to meet students when we had them return. This happened on a Tuesday, and I believe we had students return on Thursday because we really wanted to follow that guise of creating as much normalcy as possible. And any of us know that when we're going through something very chaotic in our lives, very anxiety provoking, or when things make us extremely sad, if we can return to a routine and have that predictability and what's normal, we heal much better.
Mhm.
It's much more positive. So we were really waiting to hear if Nathaniel was going to be, if he had a life ending injuries, and it
Mhm.
was possible that he did, or
Mhm.
what that would be like, because we would have to prepare for different ways to address students, right?
Sure.
So so all day Tuesday, we work with teachers. Wednesday, we work with teachers, and we started devising a plan with the teachers' input, which really follows SISM. But we provided all the materials. Like, this is what group counseling is going to be like. We'll have these setups available. So we really just prepared to receive students on Thursday. We got the word that on Thursday, Nathaniel was doing better. We would get updates every day. And so at any rate, we had that entire crisis team there. We developed a much larger crisis team than we needed, because I didn't know what we were dealing with. And I didn't know the skill sets we had or the level of comfort that our professionals would have. And
Mhm.
so I need to back up for a minute. Before I said, hey, you're going to go do this, if somebody had an extreme discomfort or it was going to activate a trauma event, I said, hey, you guys come talk to me or write it down. And I only had two people who said, I can't do this, but I'll tell you what I can help you do.
Mm.
And so I did recognize that. I want to back up and say that. And it was the same thing with teachers. But at any rate, when we received students, some students just wanted to go to class as
Mhm.
normal.
Right.
We did do debriefing by classrooms, and we did it at a dedicated time. So everybody was receiving a scripted information. We, of course,
Mhm.
delivered it in a genuine way, but we wanted all students to hear the same facts. And CISM, critical incident stress management, that's highly important, that all students or impacted individuals are receiving the same information. So
Mhm.
that's what we did. When students came back to school, we had group and individual counseling. It was needed. We had a triage system that our director of nurses, Erin Dotson, I can't say enough about her. Like, she was a lifesaver. And so we triaged, and we really had a check sheet that you go through with CISM, and we triage like what kind of support students needed. We were fortunate to be able to collaborate with community agencies that helped us for those students and families that needed more intense services. And then we also worked with the federal government, who comes in following a school shooting of something of that nature, because there's victims impact and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what we did. We had some students, it also a blessing and a curse, depending on how you want to look at it. We had students had no idea what went on,
Mhm.
because they hadn't even been dropped off yet. And we had some students that watched this in the gym. So the
Mm.
shooting occurred in the gym before school. The shooter pulled out a gun. It was a shotgun that he sawed off. And so when he shot, the buckshot or bird shot, it hit the metal roof, and that buckshot is what scattered.
Mm.
And it scattered and hit Kendall and Nathaniel, primarily because of where they were sitting. It was not a direct hit, thank goodness. But the buckshot wounds were significant enough that there had been lifelong injuries and impact. There were some students who would have a graze on a jean or something.
Mhm.
Another, you know, if there's a positive, but it was winter, so most students had on long pants or they had on coats. So
Mm.
there could have been other injuries, but there was some protection from that buckshot scattering.
Mm.
And so there was that. And then we have one more level, is that both of the shooter's parents had been district employees at one time or another. One parent was no longer employed in the district, and one of the parents was employed as a contractor,
Mm.
actually within my special ed department. And so we had some district wide impact too, just because the family was well known, very well known in the
Yeah.
community. So we managed a lot of events. And even from the state level, our superintendent, Tom Burris, was asked if we needed the state level crisis team. And he said we didn't need it, that he felt like we have it. And I think that's just a huge testimony to nothing I did, but that we
Mhm.
had a process. And because I could show that a process worked, I could get buy-in.
Mhm.
The crisis team, we stayed as a presence at Morindo Middle School the entire school year, the remainder of the school year. And
Mm.
we did some reentry when we came back in August. We waned as the year went by, but we were always there available in case there was any kind of trauma response. We just
Mhm.
always kept a pulse on the situation. We really watched staff members and made a lot of community referrals for staff. And I feel like that was very valuable. I've heard later from staff directly and in surveys that was powerful and needed.
Mhm.
And so, was it perfect? No, but I think we did a pretty good job without a team. And, shame on me, I guess, but I didn't have the heart to say you don't have a crisis team, Mr. Burris. So
Mhm.
I didn't actually tell him we didn't have a crisis team a lot. Probably that Friday, and he and I did a debrief. And I said, you didn't really have a crisis team.
Mhm.
I do think that as a result of this shooting, we developed a very strong crisis team
Mhm.
in Roswell. And interestingly, and Cynthia, you can appreciate this, and any school counselors, you can appreciate this, and any of you middle school guys and gals, there were no counselors in the middle schools in Roswell at that time.
Mhm.
There were no school counselors, there were no school social workers. And maybe I'm biased,
Mhm.
but I think the most important time to have a school counselor or social worker is the middle years.
Yes.
And that's just my personal
Yep,
opinion.
I agree.
And not that I don't think counselors aren't important at all continuums, because Cynthia, I do. But
Mhm.
man, we just go through so many changes in middle school. It's so, if you're in middle school right now, you don't have to say this out loud, but you can nod your head. I mean, like, I thought I knew everything in middle school. I might have known more than I do now, and I
Mhm.
really didn't. And there's this internal struggle to still be 10 or
Yep.
9 or 8. And
Yes.
there's this internal struggle to be like 15 and you're only 13, or to be
Yes.
16. So I get it. And I mean, counselors are so trusted. You guys that talk to your school counselors, like, we just
Mhm.
trust our counselors, right? And so
Mhm.
one thing positive that came out of this is that we got counselors or social workers in every middle school full
Ah,
time.
that's good.
And while we didn't have enough, we got there. And
Mhm.
that was the biggest thing for me. And I think it was the most daunting for me. I didn't know until that day, because I said, okay, well, where's the counselor that's assigned to Berindo? They don't need to come. And my secretary told me, Brandy, we don't have counselors in the middle school.
Mm.
I'd made it to middle schools yet. I'd only been in high schools, right?
Yeah.
And so at any rate, that it just really changed how I view everything. I think I'm a lot more open to philosophies that are different than mine. Um,
Mhm.
I'm a lot more cognizant that we have to have staff buy-in for anything to be successful,
Mhm.
and that students when they're given the right tools, are so much more resilient than what we believe. But the caveat is we have to give the tools. So
Mhm.
anyway, that I could go on and on,
Mhm.
but those are the major things that came out of this for me. And then I keep contact with people that I might not have kept contact with, and I learned so much professionally from colleagues, just about belief systems and practices. And I really got to know a portion of the school community I would have never known. So,
Well, I love that you talk about how you supported the staff. I feel like sometimes, at least in different situations, crisis situations that I was involved in, and I was in education for 31 years, and now it's been 33. I'm still working in the mental health realm, but I know that sometimes that's a forgotten part of it. It's like, oh, well, you're adults. You should be able to figure it out. Let's deal with the kids. And I think that that is a missing piece, especially after COVID,
yes,
that, you know, we did a lot to try to help the kids transition and all of the turmoil that was going on during COVID, but we kind of forgot that adults needed help too.
sure,
And then some of the adults that I was talking to try to kind of assess their needs, like, what do you need in the school system? They were afraid to say that they were struggling because then they thought that they would be looked down upon, or that they would be put on a plan of assistance, or, something would happen to them because they said, "Hey, I'm having trouble here."
sure.
And so I'm glad that, you realized that, and that was, 10 years ago. You realized that the staff needs help too. It's not just about, supporting the kids, though of course they need that as well. But I I even am thinking, like, with some of the social emotional learning that I'm still doing some I do still do some in services, like go to them to learn more things. And I recently went to one where it was all about regulating the adults, because if the adults aren't regulated, they can't help regulate the kids. And I'm like, this is so true. I've seen so many teachers and administrators that were so dysregulated in dealing with a student who had behavior problems that, they were making it far worse than they were helping the child. And so when I saw this kind of focus on staff and focus on adults' emotional regulation, I was like, this is what has been needed for a long time. So now that you've kind of moved out of, working in a school system, but you're still helping schools with therapy and services in a school, do you see do you still see this kind of lack of staff help, or does your company kind of help with the staff also?
I agree with what you're saying about staff 100%, Cynthia. And you and I have been in education long enough to know there were times in education I wouldn't have dare told anybody that I was having anxiety. And
Mhm.
I'll share this about myself. I'll be vulnerable. I suffered from years with anxiety and would have anxiety attacks and had them at school, you
Mhm.
know. And I think that I don't think my students ever knew, but now that I look back, they probably did. But I wouldn't have told any leader at school, and I was still in the classroom at the time. So we do at my company, Illuma, we do support staff with staff well-being. We do a lot of professional development around it. We do professional development for school leaders, like how do you help your staff? How do you recognize? How do you encourage vulnerability? And then we also do some professional development for teachers about how do you deal with your own self-care or anxiety issues. And I always tell everybody, Cynthia, none of this information I'm giving you is new. It's a new spin on it, but
Mhm.
we need to have it top of mind. And I know I
Mhm.
use this word a lot, but I really feel like it's relatability. So
Mhm.
we encourage vulnerability when we're relatable, right? And then it's safe. And it's just like any students walking into school, and if students are listening here, or counselors or parents, we're much more open to individuals who accept us, that we know
Mhm.
there's no judgment. And so I really think that goes with school culture too. And I don't think school culture and climate's just for students. I think it's for staff as well.
Mhm.
And I know that we're in a lot of school buildings. I've been in buildings with leaders who were like, you guys don't need to be best friends. You bring all this in. And I'm not saying if we do or we don't, but if we have good open relationships with our colleagues, then we have somebody we can be vulnerable with. And we can
Mhm.
say, hey, Cynthia, like we are in a classroom next door. I'm having an anxiety attack. Will you just talk to me for a minute? I think I do think we're seeing increased numbers of staff facing traumatic responses. Just like we talk
Mhm.
about so much around trauma-informed practices for students, we have
Mhm.
staff going through the same kinds of triggers. And
Right.
I want us to recognize this because I want staff to be present for students. And so much, we have so much shortage in education of teachers, counselors, paraprofessionals,
Mhm.
related staff. And a lot of people go through alternative training. And I have no opposition to that. But sometimes, and I've talked to so many people who are like, Brandy, I love teaching, but I went through an alternative course. I don't know any classroom management. Okay, well, let's teach it.
Mhm.
So let's find those things that are creating the stress, and let's attract people that love what they're doing, that have great knowledge, and let's teach those things that are missing. Let's find the skill gaps and teach it so we can reduce some of that. Um,
Mhm.
but I do think there's a lot of stress. I think counselors, educators, parents, principals, teachers, I just think
Mhm.
we have so much accountability, which I believe we need, but let's find where we can put some coping skills in place, or some skills in place. And so, yeah, we do that at Illuma, and I advocate for that greatly.
I love that. Now your group provides some kinds of different services, and I'm guessing that's when there are these gaps of an actual physical person in a building doing the job. The school can contract or work with your group to get some of those services, virtually, because they don't have a person in the building doing that job. Is that correct?
Correct. We do that. And then what else we do, Cynthia, and any of you school folks that are listening, schools, I think we're famous or infamous for throwing people at a problem. We
Mhm.
really try to work with schools to resource map, to find out where are your gaps. Like maybe you just need training, capacity building for the staff you do have.
Mhm.
Or maybe if we delivered your SEL curriculum for you, or it taught social behavior skills using the methodology that you wanted, and we could do that synchronously or asynchronously, then we free up people in your building. So
Mm,
and one of the other, so we do a lot of that, and then we partner with a company and we support universal screeners. And I'm not talking about mental health screeners as much as I'm talking about the social behavior strength screener. So we really look at student strengths. We partner with the DESA, which is a strengths-based screener. So for everybody who's sitting here right now thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to expose all these mental health issues, what the DESA does is it exposes social emotional competencies that are
mm,
strengths, and we teach to those skill gaps just like we teach math or reading skills.
mm,
And so we really try to look at that and tackle behavior, teach schools how to tackle behavior from that end too, so we reduce some of that stress that's on staff.
mhm.
And so we do that as well.
I like that focus on strengths. In my own anxiety program, I focus on strengths. I have my clients take the UMAP assessment, which the strengths portion is Clifton Strengths from the Gallup poll. So it's like a very well trusted strengths indicator. And I talk to them a lot about their strengths and how they can use those strengths to help them manage their anxiety, which I think is so helpful. Most of my clients, because of anxiety, lack confidence because they just feel like anxiety is in control and, they just can't seem to get it together sometimes or feel like they don't have any control over it. So when they think about what their strengths are and they realize, oh, some of these things, I didn't even know they were strengths. So I
Yeah.
could see how that could be so helpful. One of the programs that my school that I was last at was using was Sources of Strength,
Okay.
which is a program that focuses on the strengths that we have in our whole life. And then they just kind of highlight different strengths throughout the year, and kids can think about these different pieces of themselves, and they could see, oh, well, I don't have very many resources in this strength, so I'm going to work on that, but I have a lot of resources over here. And then they can kind of see maybe this person has resources they don't have, so they can partner with them. And it was just a great way to help the whole school climate and all of the students' mental health by focusing on strengths instead of saying, these are problems or these are the problems that this school has. We looked at what was going well and using those things. So I think that that is a great way to look at that. Now, when you mention that you could teach this social emotional curriculum to free up actual people at the school, do you teach it as a group, or how, like the I know as a counselor in a middle school and in an elementary school, I would go in and teach a lesson once a week on some social emotional thing. And so it would be like maybe virtually students would watch something and I would be back in my office working individually with students. Is that how it would work?
So yeah, so that's very much the same. I really, when I thought of the concept and started collaborating with school leaders and our internal staff, I really came from the premise of classroom guidance lessons because
Mm.
that was my favorite
Mhm.
parts of being a school counselor.
Mhm.
I had the classes that I pushed into every single day. And
Mhm.
so what our intent is here is for the school to identify, hey, we want to deliver this to our eighth grade science classes. And so we would go in, we would have dedicated days of the week. And so if you wanted to do it synchronously, you would log into our channel at 9 a.m. on Monday, and we're going to have a 20-minute lesson and 10 minutes of discussion. Our only ask is that a staff member, be it the teacher or the counselor, be present. So if there needs to be additional levels of questioning,
Mhm.
or if there's not time for that, we also deliver an asynchronous model. So you can tap into it at whatever time your school leader says. And then we
Mhm.
will provide with the curriculum that you provide, because we don't sell curriculum for
Mhm.
social emotional learning right now, but we would take that curriculum, build out the lessons, and even some discussion questions, and try to help support the educator who may have questions pop up.
Mhm.
And so we can do both formats.
Okay.
And we just ask, if it is synchronous, just have somebody available because we certainly want to support the students. And I believe for me, if I was still a classroom teacher and I didn't know what I knew as a school counselor, or even as a school counselor that's newer learning, I could pick up from what somebody else had said, right? And it might give me another idea. So again, it's about building that capacity across a
Mhm.
lot of levels. And I just want to see the continuity in schools. And
Mhm.
for me, just like you said, Cynthia, I still want to build a support school counselors. I think it's a hugely impactful job. And
Mhm.
I don't think you school counselors realize the impact that you have until you're able to step away from it. And so let's build the capacity and ease some of that stress or work.
Yeah, I love that, and I know that they will love that too.
Yeah.
So, what are some other things or anything else that you would like us to know about what you do or how your work maybe helps with anxiety or resilience, or maybe how people can get a hold of you or look at Illuma and see if it's good for their school?
Sure. So, really, everything we do. So, I am a huge believer in risk and resiliency and building protective factors. And my major professor, when I was getting my master's in school counseling, I was super fortunate to go to Texas Christian University. And I'll have to plug. You can look at some of her work. Dr. Becky Taylor. All of her work is in risk and resiliency. And so, I started learning a long time ago. I'm not even going to tell you how many years ago that was about risk and resiliency and protective factors. So at Illuma, when we really think about what we're providing, is we really try to think, how are we building capacity for school staff? How can we build capacity for parents? But how do we build protective factors for our students so that we improve resiliency and decrease risk? And then it goes back to love and logic. I always think in my head, what's going to be cheaper? And I don't necessarily mean monetary. It's going to be cheaper if I build up resiliency now than if I have to pay for the risky behaviors later. And
Mhm.
I try to talk to students about that too. So you parents, look up love and logic and just look at their cost of risk and resiliency. So we really focus on protective factors. That was one of the reasons that we partnered with the DESA when we wanted to promote the universal screener. And what we do is we are a reseller of their screener, but we support it. A lot of schools, and you guys may be one of those schools, they say, oh, we have a universal screener, but we don't do anything with the data. So what we're there
Mhm.
to do is we're going to disseminate the data. We're going to analyze it for you, meet with your decision makers, whoever that might be that's dedicated in the school, and we're going to talk about next steps. Where do we do large group instruction? Where do we do small group instruction? Where do we do individual? But it all has the idea of protective factors. And then we're going to look at those and we're going to reassess and think about how do we build the climate? Have we made any changes? And so we want to look at a universal way to address social behavior
Mhm.
rather than just funnel students to the most restrictive type of interventions. We
Mhm.
want to build on those, just like we do academics. I'm a wholehearted believer in the tiered system for not only academics but for behavioral health as well.
Mm.
And so that's really what I've tried to promote at Illuma. And I think we have good buy-in and it resonates with a lot of schools, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So,
definitely.
yeah. So I would love to have anybody reach out to me at any time, email me. I still love to talk to anybody in school, even if you're a student. I miss contact, but you make sure it's okay with your parent first before you're just
Mhm.
messaging some lady. Uh, but my email address is B as in boy, Samuel, Samuell at elumatherapy.com. And if you want to know more about Illuma, you can just look us up at Illuma Therapy. We actually have a very cool tool that's going live. And it's really just a resource, a little self-assessment resource mapping for your school. And then
Mm.
we'll send you some tailored recommendations that are just a little snapshot of things to try. And it's really about developing that school-wide tiered social behavior support. So
Mhm.
it's a pretty interesting. We use a lot of information that we get out of the National Council for School Mental Health, and we made up our own little. It's just a little screener, and we credit them. But it's interesting, and we've tested it with a few schools, and they're like, "Hey, this is pretty cool." So
Mhm.
if you go on our website, give it a shot, and I think you'll enjoy it.
That sounds great. I will definitely put these links in the show notes so everyone can can contact you and also
Sure.
try out that screener too. So, well, thank you so much, Brandy, for being with us. I think these conversations are so important for everyone, because I do have my teens, I've got my parents, I've got my school counselors out there, all the people that are listening. I think everybody needs to have this information and be able to advocate for kids and mental health in schools and for the staff to have good mental health in schools. So, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it so much.
You're so welcome.